Yo, 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 what is up, guys? It's Cohen back here again today with another episode of After the Buzzer. We just had the first round of the playoffs wrap up with Clippers Mavericks Game 7, really highly anticipated by pretty much everyone, me especially. This is the series I've been saying it over and over again that I was most excited for in this first round, and it didn't disappoint. Kind of turned into a blowout towards the end of the game with the Los Angeles Clippers really pulling away at the end. But it was really back and forth throughout the first half, throughout that third quarter. It was just towards the end of the game, which the Mavericks did make it close at the end, or closer, but ultimately the Clippers' talent really just prevailed in this game. And I think what this series overall says about this Clippers team is that this is not last year's Clippers team. If this was the same Clippers that we saw last year, mentality-wise, personnel-wise, they would have choked in this series. Not necessarily choked since they were down 2 games, but they would have cracked under the pressure. This last year's Clippers team does not win this series. I can guarantee you that. And that's because they just weren't ready. They acted like they had won stuff before. The personnel wasn't that great. Guys just didn't really play up to the level that they were capable of, and it felt like every time they got in a big-time, crunch-time situation, they folded. That includes pretty much everyone on this roster. Paul George got a lot of slack for the way he played last season. Kawhi Leonard really disappeared in a lot of the fourth quarters in last year's Nuggets series where they lost after being up 3-1. Their role players did not produce. It was just an all-around failure on all levels by the franchise, and then coming into this year's playoffs, it looked like it was going to happen again. 2 games into the series, Mavericks winning the first 2 in Los Angeles. That's a big hole to be in if you're the Clippers after the way that you had to deal with adversity last season. You're supposed to be a title contender. You tried to face the Dallas Mavericks in the first round, which I still think was a big mistake looking back on it, but they tried to face the Dallas Mavericks in this first round because they didn't want to have to face the Lakers in that second round. They didn't want to face them until the Western Conference Finals, which isn't even a concern now because the Suns knocked them out. But they wanted to play this team after facing them last year, and the Mavericks took that as a sign of disrespect. And they came in and they punched the Clippers in the mouth in those first 2 games. The Clippers, to their credit, responded, punching them back for the next 2 games, tying it up at 2-2. And then the Mavericks go and they beat the Clippers on the road, taking a 3-2 series lead. And that at that point, the Clippers could have folded because then they have 2 games left that they need to win. One of them in Dallas, which they would have to win a road game, which would be the 6th straight road win by an NBA team in a playoff series, which has never happened. In the history of the NBA playoffs, no series has ever saw the road team win the first 6 games. So the Clippers, all the odds were against them to win that game. And despite that, they came out, they made adjustments, and they won that game. And then coming into today, with the road team continuing to win, it was going to be tough for the Mavericks, but a precedent had been set that they had the ability to beat the Clippers in Staples Center. And what did they do? They battled really hard for that first half, and the Mavericks came in that third quarter and punched them again. They went up by I think it was 5 or 7 points, and it was like, oh my God, are the Clippers going to do it again? And then they went on like a 10-0 run or something like that, took a lead, and they never looked back from that point on. They had some run where I think they outscored the Mavericks 21-7 or just something crazy like that in that third to fourth quarter range. They just took over. Their talent took over. Paul George, like I said, he was really criticized for the way that he played last season, and it was well deserved in terms of his play. But Paul George killed it in this series. Paul George was really good in this series and really good in this Game 7. 22.6 rebounds, but probably the biggest thing was his 10 assists. Something that the Clippers really struggled with last season was distributing the ball. It felt like they settled into a lot of really slow isolation type plays. And this season, what they did was they really, especially in this game, had incredible ball movement. There were so many times where they just got these wide open corner 3 looks. They didn't always fall, but when they did, they were devastating. And it felt like every time the Mavericks started to make a little bit of a run, the Clippers got the ball to either Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, and they either went and got them a basket or got the ball to someone on the perimeter that hit a 3 to get them a basket. Luke Kennard came up big in this game. Shout out to my guy Buzz. He knows who he is. If he's watching this video, he'll let me know. He always talks about Luke Kennard being an X factor, and he was in this game. 11 points, a big performance from him. A guy that really hasn't seen the court much at all this season. Reggie Jackson, a guy that really didn't see the court all that much to start off this series, became a starter and a critical piece to them winning this series. And a lot of those adjustments come down to Tyronn Lue. He had Rajon Rondo, a guy who has a reputation for coming up big in playoff games. And instead of going to Rondo, who was not good in this game, he stuck with Reggie Jackson. He stuck with his guy who has proven him right and who he has given opportunities and been rewarded with those opportunities every single time. He said, all right, I'm going to stick to my guy. I know we have Rajon Rondo out there who's won a championship. He's won 2 championships. He has proven to be a playoff performer, but I want Reggie out there. And Reggie Jackson hit 2 of those, the biggest momentum-killing threes I've seen in this entire series and in the playoffs recently. The Mavericks cut this game down to, I think it was 7 late in the game, and then Reggie Jackson drills a really deep 3 to sink them. It was really impressive stuff from him. Batum playing at the center was a great adjustment by Tyronn Lue as well. Zubac only played 3 minutes in this game, even though they played Boban a lot, because ultimately the Clippers' wing defenders have good enough hands to try and keep Boban out of the post and smack the ball away when he gets up there with it. Boban got blocked a lot for how tall he is, and he lost the ball a lot. Given he did have a good game, but it felt like that he could have done more, but the Clippers did a great job of doubling him when he got the ball down there and hitting the ball out of his hands. Paul George and Kawhi Leonard stepped up in a big way. I haven't talked much about Kawhi Leonard yet, but he was 1 assist short of a triple-double, 28, 10, and 9. Like I said, him and Paul George were either scoring or they were finding the right man to score. That was what made the difference. The Mavericks' defensive rotations were solid in this game, but the Clippers' ball movement was ridiculous. It was some of the best ball movement. Actually, it was the best ball movement I've ever seen from this Clippers team in this era. In this game 7, when they needed it most. They were getting open 3 after open 3. They destroyed the Mavericks from the perimeter today. And there was nothing they could do. The Mavericks tried playing that zone that they played last game, but the zone was getting torn apart ultimately because the Clippers just weren't missing from 3. The zone kind of gives them a little bit of those wing 3 opportunities, but sometimes that's what you've got to live with. And it worked a little bit in the last couple games because they weren't on fire from 3. But in this game, they were on fire. And ultimately, there was nothing they could do. They just couldn't stop it. Luka Doncic did all he could. He kind of fizzled out in the 3rd quarter. He really started to pick it back up towards the end of the 4th. I think the guy's just exhausted. He played 45 minutes in this game. He had 46, 7, and 14. He's the youngest player in NBA history to have a 40-point game in the playoffs. He's ridiculous. He is a future all-time great. I think he's going to be top 10 all-time when he retires. And he is the first guy that I've seen come into the league in a little bit that I truly feel like is a guy that's going to be this generation's greatest of all time. Like, there was Michael Jordan, there was Kareem, there was LeBron James, like those type of guys. Kobe Bryant, even for some people. Luka Doncic is going to be one of those guys. Luka Doncic is going to be someone's GOAT someday. I can guarantee you that if he continues to play the way that he has shown to start his career. This team is just not good enough. They just weren't. To beat a title team that is the Los Angeles Clippers, a team with a lot of resilience in this series, resilience that we hadn't seen in the past. And ultimately, I think that this series is what this Clippers team needed to try and make a finals run. I'm not saying they're going to make the finals. I'm not even saying they're going to beat the Utah Jazz in the 2nd round, which I'll talk a little bit about that series in a second. But I think that this Clippers team needed to face some adversity. If they went into the series, whoever they played, maybe it wasn't the Mavericks, or maybe it was the Mavericks, and they ended up sweeping them. Then they get to a 2nd round series where they face a lot of adversity and they're not battle tested yet. I'm not sure if they come out of that series. I think they needed to realize that, hey, we can get past this adversity. I'm sure some people in that Clippers locker room, especially guys that were on the team last season, saw what was happening and were like, oh God, here we go again. And instead, they said, we're not letting this happen again. We're going to step up. We're going to play up to the level we're capable of. We're going to get the ball to Kawhi Leonard, and he's going to make plays happen. Kawhi Leonard in this series looked like Toronto 2019 Raptors Kawhi Leonard. It was ridiculous. He was hitting incredible shot after incredible shot, and ultimately, the way with how good this Clippers offense was, even when the Mavericks made this close, I was like, it doesn't matter. This game is over. The series is over in that 4th quarter because I don't see how the Mavericks can stop the offense that the Clippers have going right now. I just didn't see a way that they could make them miss. It didn't feel like it was possible most of that 4th quarter. And that was the difference tonight. The way that they executed, the way that they stuck to their game plan, they didn't get stuck in that ISO-centric offensive type tendency thing. They did what they had to do. I don't think this is necessarily like a Doc Rivers problem. I'm not saying Doc Rivers was the problem last season. I think overall it was a mentality, a personnel type thing, maybe a little bit of coaching in there as well. But I do want to give credit to Tyronn Lue. This is not a diss at all to Doc Rivers. This is just credit to Tyronn Lue, who did a great job, like I said previously, adjusting in this series and getting guys to commit to their roles. And he did great in this series. I destroyed him after the first 2 games because he wasn't making any adjustments. I don't know if you watched that video or if he was just like, yeah, I should probably coach a little bit. But in between games 3 and 7, those games were beautifully coached from him. They lost one along the way in there, but ultimately didn't matter. Coming out of this series, making it out of a really tough, scary series for them, facing Luka Doncic, who, like I said, is a generational player. He's the definition of generational. That term gets thrown around a lot, but if there's one player in the NBA, especially one of those young guys that you can throw it to, it's Luka Doncic. So where do the Clippers go from, or first, I guess I'll start with the Mavericks. Where do the Mavericks go from here? They need to grab someone who can be more of a playmaker. They tried to play Trey Burke in this game, and it went terribly. I don't know why Trey Burke played in this game. I guess Rick Carlisle was just trying to find something that would work. He was trying to find an offensive spark, someone who maybe could create their own shot when Luka was really just gassed. But he was just bad on both sides of the ball, smoked like a layup, got blown by on defense, had a bad foul in there too. Trey Burke just wasn't the answer in here. I guess I got to give credit to Rick Carlisle for at least trying something, but I really don't see the appeal of why he played in this game. They've just got to find someone that can take some pressure off Luka. Kristaps probably going to be gone if they can trade him. I'm not going to talk about this too much because I want to make a video about the Mavericks like I still need to make for a couple of the teams that got eliminated from the playoffs. I promise those videos are still coming. It's just with this game, these games throughout the day, as well as all of the, like, moving on to the second round, trying to do series previews and stuff like that. I haven't really had much time. So ultimately, you will see a video about the Mavericks in the coming days, as well as I want to make a video talking about this first round. Particularly, I want to ask you guys for some hot takes about the first round of the NBA playoffs, so be on the lookout for a tweet about that. Probably tomorrow, I might want to make that video, so be on the lookout for that. If you want to be in that video, follow me on Twitter at 3_cone, and make sure you comment on that tweet. But heading into the second round for the Clippers, they face a really tough Utah Jazz team that's going to do a lot of kind of what the Mavericks did, but better. They're not going to have a Luka Doncic. They don't have a player of that caliber, but they do have a great defensive player in Rudy Gobert, who's going to try and be a Boban-type player in this series in terms of he's going to be a really big presence that they're going to have to deal with down low. Do they go back to Zubac? Do they stick with the Nicholas Batum at the center lineup? What do you do there? Because Rudy Gobert is much better than Boban. Rudy Gobert is going to more utilize his height, and he's also going to make it really difficult for the Clippers to really attack inside like they like to do. Especially Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. They like to get into the teeth of the defense, take those tough fadeaways, or also sometimes just try and get to the basket. Especially Paul George. And so the Jazz have to find a way to limit that and force the Clippers to focus more on the perimeter. Given if they have a hot shooting night like this, it's really tough to stop them. But at the same time, the Jazz are better equipped to handle those perimeter guys. The Mavericks have a couple solid two-way defenders like Dorian Finney-Smith, who was great in this game, by the way. He is a guy that can kind of handle on the perimeter. But Tim Hardaway Jr., less so. They just don't have enough wing defender guys. And with Bogdanovich, Joe Ingles, different guys that you can throw at the Clippers. I blanked on the team for some reason. Mike Conley is a solid defender. Donovan Mitchell has shown some defensive ability in these playoffs so far and over the course of this season. I think they have a lot of good personnel to match up with them. I'm not really sure who's going to come out of this series. I think this one could go either way. If you're asking me to pick now, I'm probably going to go Clippers in 7 just because of Kawhi Leonard, the way that he's played in these playoffs so far. He was the MVP of the first round. I don't think that's something that is really debatable with the way that he played, the way that he closed out this series, and the way, especially in Game 6, he took over and showed why he's one of the best players in the league. So those are my final thoughts on this series. Great series, just as I was anticipating. I couldn't have asked for more. Maybe a little bit of a better ending in that Game 7, but ultimately you can't ask for too much. And then if we're going to talk about Hawks-Sixers, this was a very weird game. The Sixers went down by 26 in the first half. I believe it was even in the first quarter, maybe the second quarter, but they were down by 26 points at some point in this game, and they only ended up losing by 4. This was a big win for the Hawks. You want to come into the road team's arena or the home team's arena and beat them. That's exactly what they did. They did that by a combination of Trae Young being a great facilitator as well as a great scorer. They had Danny Green, the Sixers, on Trae Young in the first half, and he just got exposed. However, when the Sixers switched over to Ben Simmons and Matisse Thybulle, things kind of slowed, which I think is something I'll talk about in a second that I think they will commit to more. But the Hawks' game plan was a combination of Trae Young, floaters, and hitting some threes, combined with the great three-point shooters surrounding him. They've done a fantastic job building this roster around Trae Young. Bogdanovich is a bucket, Kevin Huerter's a bucket, Solomon Hill can hit a three here and there, John Collins was great in this game. The ability of Trae Young to draw in the defense, especially away from those corners, and hit the open guy, no matter what passing lane he has or the little amount of space that is available to him, is amazing. It's really impressive to watch. And it was a combination of elite off-ball movement by those guys, realizing whenever someone would sag off of them to shift over a little bit and make sure they were in a good position to take that shot with little contest. There was a lot of that. Clint Capella also had great off-ball movement in this game, shielding defenders away from Trae Young down in the post when he wanted to take that floater, as well as getting ready for lobs and being in position where if Joel Embiid jumped on the floater, Trae Young had a direct path to get that lob to Clint Capella. He was great in this game, and I think he's like the best center possible for Trae Young in the league at this point, outside of a guy like a Joel Embiid or something like that. But while the Hawks should be very happy about this game, I don't think the Sixers should beat themselves up too much about this, because really in that second half, and especially in that fourth quarter, the Sixers figured it out. Matisse Thybulle was incredible. I wish there was a way to get him on my basketball team. I tweeted that out earlier, but I love Matisse Thybulle. Him and Dort on the perimeter would be incredible. And I think ultimately the Sixers, I think they kind of figured out what they need to do in this series, and I expect the series to kind of make a big turn in the upcoming games. Maybe I could be wrong, but with the way they played at the end, some of the Hawks had some of the worst late game execution, especially in the playoffs. Maybe the worst executed, like, intense playoff game, the final couple minutes of it, I've ever seen. It was awful, really, really bad. Careless turnovers. They couldn't handle double teams. Trae Young really struggled with the double teams. That was the biggest thing in this game for me that really stuck out in terms of the Sixers, things that they need to look to do going forward. They've got to put pressure on. They've got to do more of those full court type things, and they've got to double team Trae Young more. When Trae Young got double teamed, a lot of times he threw the ball away, or he was making a tough pass that would kind of fumble in the guy's hands and not allow him to make a good three-point shot. If he did end up shooting it, it was off. It was very rare that they were able to get it because he's not usually getting it to them kind of like that. Typically, they're getting it right in their shooting pocket and going straight up with it. Sometimes even Bogdanovich catches it like right up here at his head level and will just flick his wrist and it'll go in. He had a clutch shot to end this game that really saved them from collapsing. But the Hawks have to be better. If they execute like that down the stretch, especially since they're up 26 in this game, and they won by 4 points. They shot incredibly well in this game. You can't be happy if you're the Hawks winning by 4 points. The Hawks themselves and Nate McMillan, I'm sure, are really pissed at themselves for that late game execution. They've got to be better than that if they want to try and make this a series and win this series ultimately. They've got to be better. As for the Sixers, they've got to commit more to the way that they played in the second half of the game. Joel Embiid looked healthy today, which was great to see. I was really happy to see him go out there and play, especially since he was kind of playing like he has been all season. He didn't look very hindered by that injury, which was great. Tobias Harris was good. Ben Simmons had a great game, and I still saw people giving him crap on the timeline. He missed a couple free throws at the end, but ultimately this was just a team-wide loss. It wasn't on Ben Simmons at all. Ben Simmons had a good game. Like I said, Matisse Thybulle with 10 points was great. Korkmaz had some good moments. Dwight Howard struggled a little bit in this game at times. He couldn't hit a lot of those putback shots. Ultimately, though, I think this was a good sign for the Sixers, or as good of a sign for the Sixers as it can be going forward in terms of losing the game. You lost the game, but you fought up there at the end. You fought through adversity and tried to come back. You just barely came up short, but you now know what you need to do going forward. I think they're going to make adjustments, and I think they tie up this series. However, I do need to give a big shout out to the Hawks for the way that they played. They came and they punched the Sixers in the mouth, which is kind of similar to the way that the Mavericks did. The Mavericks were an underdog that has a just absolutely special offensive player in Luka Doncic. The Hawks similarly with Trae Young, two guys that were traded for each other, and they both really stepped up today for their teams. It was just unfortunate for Luka Doncic that no one else stepped up, whereas for Trae Young, he managed to make the Sixers pay, as well as some of his teammates stepped up at the end. Bogdanovich shushing the Philly crowd was really cool. He's built for big moments, it looks like. So, shout out to the Atlanta Hawks. Shout out to Nate McMillan for getting this win. I'm interested to see where this series goes from here. I think the Sixers and Hawks both have a lot to build on with this game, and I think that this is going to be a fun one. So that's all I have to say about these two games. Let me know what you guys thought about these games. Who do you have in that the Clippers Jazz series? What do you think about that? Do you think I'm right in saying that they needed this adversity, or that this adversity is really going to help them going forward? And in terms of Hawks Sixers, do you think the Sixers have kind of figured them out? Do you think in that fourth quarter they showed an ability to stop the Hawks, or do you think the Hawks really are this offensive dynamo that's going to give the Sixers fits throughout the series? I appreciate you guys watching this video. Let me know all that in the comment section below. If you made it to this point, I don't know, I guess drop a playoff P in the comment section below, because he was good tonight, and he deserves credit for that. So, I appreciate you guys watching this video. I will see you guys later. Real One, say it back.